Hi folks, well we're out in the woods and we're ready to start doing some cutting here. Now what I have in front of me here is actually the top of a maple tree that snapped off in a windstorm earlier in the summer. It's been laying here for a number of months. I've seen it as I've driven by, and it's the first time I've come up to it to see what I've got as far as wood goes. Oh, the section that I'm pointing at right now is maybe 10-11 inches in diameter there. But the tree that it snapped off from, forgive me, I'm going to be kind of where the sun is here, and I don't want to do it that way. There's the top of the tree. Now, this tree will never amount to anything because the top is snapped off and it's twisted anyhow. So it's, as far as this ever growing into a good sized saw log, it's not going to happen. So before it rots, I'm going to cut it up and turn it into firewood. I believe this is hard maple. I think so. I'll tell you when I start cutting it, but so it will burn well. Now, my first move here is to make sure I have safe access around this trunk of this tree, this base of this tree, before I start cutting it. I'm going to cut, as you can see the way it arches, I'm going to cut so that it falls that way. But just in case things don't work as planned, I want to be able to have an escape route away from where the danger is. The weight of this trunk, if it were to hit me, could kill me. It could crush body parts, etc. So I want to be able to, if it doesn't fall the way I want it to, be able to move in a number of directions away from it so that I'm safe. The other thing you also have to consider with something like this is that even if I cut this clean through, when this falls down, the back end here could bounce up in the air and move one direction or another. So you want to give yourself plenty of distance between you and the falling tree. I probably won't cut it all the way through. I'll just cut it so that it so that it will fall. I'm not worried about making a nice clean, saving the lumber kind of cut like you would if you were cutting timber. I'm just trying to get it down. But before I do that, I've got to cut up this top and get those pieces out of the way so that I can move around the entire base of the tree freely. So that's my first step. Probably take the smaller saw to do that. Just cut the pieces off. There's a fair amount of firewood even in these smaller pieces. So I don't want to waste any of it. I usually don't cut anything smaller than maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches in diameter. When you get down to about 1 inch, it becomes just kindling, and I don't need any kindling. So I'll cut maybe that small and then haul those down. Probably, since I'm a distance away from the truck, I'll just cut branches and drag branches rather than cut up individual pieces and then have to walk back and forth as many trips. But these are going to be heavy enough that I'll have to section it. So I'll cut it to the length that I want for my stove, and then I'll just have to take it back home and split it. So that's the step, or the plan. Step one is to deal with this top. So I didn't bring a tripod with me, so I don't know what I can do with the camera. If I can find a place to set it so that you can watch a bit of that, I will. I've just got to look at some of these rocks here, maybe that I can set it on and get a good angle. But at any rate, that's where we are, and we'll come back to you. All right, folks, we're ready to get started on this tree. Forgive the stand that this is on. Also, my battery's almost dead. I don't know how much of this I'll get. My backup battery won't hold a charge anymore, so sorry about that. So we'll see what we can do. I cut the other one out of the way, and now we're ready to work on this one. So hang in there with me. Felt just like I wanted it to. And it's still solid. I was worried that maybe it was a bit rotten in the middle. Are we still recording here? Yes, I guess we are. Good. Okay, let me walk you up here. You can see this a little bit better. I don't know what kind of quality we had, but as you can see, because I knew it was leaning this way, I knew this is the way it should wanted to fall. Gravity would do that. So I notched the front, as you saw, so it would have a hinge, and then I came down on an angle. You can do that as long as the tree's leaning, but the last thing I want to do is pinch the saw in there, of course. But once, as I was cutting, I didn't feel a saw binding. I felt that the wood was separating along the saw cut, so I knew it was heading that way. And then once I started to feel it give more, I thought, okay, I've cut enough that a little push should be able to do it. So that's what I did rather than cut it straight through. That way it was still hinged enough on there with the wood that it would guide it down, and the end of the stump here wouldn't kick back at me. So this is not how loggers would do this. I want to emphasize that. But because they've got a better way to do it, because see how much of the board you would waste of the stump here. They'd cut the stumps close to the ground and cut them straight across so they get the maximum board usage out of it. Now I'll come through here and cut this stump off later and get a couple pieces of firewood out of it. That's not a problem. But it's simpler this way, I think, and easier to just if you're just cutting firewood. So there it is. It's laying down all along through there, and I just have to start cutting it up into pieces as I can get through these briar bushes I've got here. This was land that was timbered a few years ago, so what's growing up here is a lot of undergrowth, a lot of brush, a lot of these wild blackberry thorns, so it's going to be ugly for a while in here until some of these other saplings grow up and shade out the ground. Once they shade out the canopy floor, all of this stuff will die, and then the trees will continue to grow. So this isn't the greatest part of the forest here. As you can see, it's very rocky soil, but these trees have been doing well here. Like I said, if this one hadn't, well, actually, I'm sorry, this one wouldn't have made it either. If you look here, if you look right here in the center, there's already heart rot going on there. For whatever reason, it started to rot in the middle. So this wouldn't have probably made it into a good sized saw log. Now how far up the log the rot goes, I don't know. If this was a little bigger and had been harvested, what the logger would do is he'd haul it back to his cutter and he'd take some slices off of this until he got past the rot, and then he'd make logs from what good wood was left, assuming it doesn't go all the way up through. But eventually, by the time this thing would get big enough, it's not quite big enough to harvest. It could be a minimal size saw log perhaps now. It wasn't 4 years ago. But if you let it go another 10 years, which would be probably how soon I'll be back timbering again, it'll probably rot out and be worthless. So at least I get the firewood usage out of it. I don't know why these hard maples tend to rot in the center like this. I don't know enough about the biology of it. But while it's still good, I'm going to put it to productive use rather than just rot in the woods. Yeah, it'd add fertilizer to the ground, I understand that, but if you look around here, there's plenty of fertilizer already. Other branches, brush, leaves. The forest does regenerate itself, so that's not a problem. All right, well, I'm going to cut this up. As you can see, I did cut up the other one. There's some pieces there, and I have to get them all the way down over to where my truck is. So that'll be a project probably for the rest of the day or into a couple days. I still have some other wood up in here I got to haul too. So, but that's the basics of cutting down trees and cutting for firewood anyhow. And one thing I didn't mention in a previous video about the chainsaw, it's also common sense, but as I was cutting, I was thinking I should have mentioned that. You never ever want the blade, the chain, while it's spinning, to touch the ground or a rock. Anything like that will dull it instantly, even if it's in the mud or the dirt. You don't want that at all. In fact, when you're cutting wood, you got to be careful there isn't too much mud on down wood, you know, from being sitting in the mud or whatever, or that's enough to dull the chainsaw blade. You just have to be careful that the only thing that it comes in contact with is the wood that you're cutting. And if you do that, it'll stay sharp for a fair amount of time, and then you don't have to hassle with changing it out or sharpening it. So just another basic tip, just don't ground the saw, so to speak, is what they say. All right, so thank you for watching, and we'll get back to you with some more of our adventures in firewood collecting.